Hey guys, you may notice we are no longer in DCS and we are back to flying in real life in my new Yakovlev Yak-55M Mischief, getting ready for an aerobatics competition. And as you all know at this point, I'm Spud, as always, and today's video is all about learning to fly acro in my new Yak and getting to a point where I feel confident in my ability to fly in a competition without making a fool of myself. Which, of course, spoiler alert, I definitely did. So when it comes to learning to fly acro in a new aircraft, I like to mentally break it down into 3 distinct steps or phases that I move through. And I will only really feel ready, or at least as ready as I can be, after moving through all 3 phases. Upon getting my hands on the aircraft all the way back in July, I was seriously hoping to be able to move up a level to the IAC's intermediate category, now that I was flying a more powerful and maneuverable aircraft type. But, as we talked about in the last video, we were having some pretty major issues with the aircraft, and specifically her engine, that were really making me nervous about ever flying the aircraft, let alone having adequate time to prepare for the upcoming competition. So shortly after my first flight in the aircraft, which you guys got to see here on YouTube of course, and it's linked and pinned in the comment section down below, I had to make the decision to stay in the sportsman category due to my so far very low number of hours in the aircraft and my ever dwindling time available for preparing for the competition. And especially with my airline flying schedule factored in, and occasionally trying to make some videos for you guys here on YouTube. I also sorta had to come to terms with my ego a bit, and really hammer hard into myself that, with a Yak-55M, I am really not going to be winning any national championships or scoring huge corporate sponsorships. It's really all about having fun and enjoying the spectacle of and participating in IAC competitions. And most importantly, keeping in mind why I fly aerobatics in the first place. To keep a family legacy going and to keep the love of aviation alive. With the latter being a critical part for me personally, because so many airline pilots lose that love of and passion for flying over the years and become a bit bitter and jaded. And I never want to see myself become that grumpy airline pilot. Not to mention the fact that I hadn't competed in a while, and was still getting my aerobatic legs back under me and trying to stave off air sickness and increase my G tolerance. And of course, on top of that, it has been a very, very hot late summer here in Southern California, which definitely doesn't help with the air sickness and G tolerance. But that didn't mean that preparing for and flying in the competition would be any less fun. And like I've found in the past, sometimes the practice for a contest can be even more fun than the competition itself. So let's dig into the 3 different phases of becoming competition ready in the Yak-55M. The first phase was just getting used to flying the aircraft and performing basic aerobatic maneuvers, which you guys saw me start doing right away on my very first flight in the Yak in the last video. Thankfully, I never had any issues landing the aircraft, so all of my attention could go straight to learning to tame this beast of an aircraft up in the air. I find that tailwheel airplanes tend to land far more similar to a jet than say a regular training aircraft like a Cessna 172 or a Piper Archer. So moving back and forth between work flying and aerobatic flying really hasn't been an issue so far. I just gotta remember to wake up those feet on the rudder pedals before flying a tailwheel airplane and making sure to keep that stick back while taxiing. And finally having an airplane that can do true overhead patterns and brakes has been way too much fun. And I'm sure that Gillespie Tower is probably tired of the red and white Yak asking for overheads at this point. However, learning to fly aerobatics in the Yak-55M has really been a bit tougher than I was expecting. While almost any pilot could go out and play around and throw the Yak around the sky, which is an absolute blast, to fly precise and beautiful aerobatic figures takes a bit more finesse. And with an engine that turns the wrong way, I had to get rid of quite a lot of muscle memory when it came to doing hammerheads and spins and getting used to doing them to the right rather than the left. Which, ironically, came back to bite me in the next phase of competition prep, because the Sportsman known is constructed with a spin to the left rather than the right. And man, forcing the big old heavy Yak to spin the wrong direction was a challenge to get the grasp of. At some point in phase 1 of competition prep, I really realized that I was kind of spinning my wheels and not really getting anywhere, and that I was going to need some help. And this of course really didn't make me feel any better about flying in a competition less than a month away now. Now that I more or less know how to fly aerobatic figures in the Yak-55M, even if they aren't really all that pretty so far, the second phase of getting competition ready in the Yak-55 is all about starting to practice the actual figures required of the IAC's Sportsman known, which in this contest I've elected to fly 3 knowns instead of creating my own free. Taking a look at the Arresti diagram of the IAC Sportsman known, we can see that there are a total of 11 figures for the sequence. First, we start off with a hump D up, moving to a 45-degree upline and cap off, into an upright 1 1/4 spin, moving into the y-axis of the box, and pulling up into a hammerhead with your belly facing towards the judges, with a quarter roll on the down line back onto the x-axis of the box. Pulling out into a shark's tooth with a half roll from inverted, and using the energy there to pull up into an Immelman with a half roll over the top, and resetting across the box to the right of the box into a 2 of 4 roll into a split S, allowing for energy buildup into a loop at center stage, and a half Cuban with a half roll from inverted and into a competition turn, and finally finishing with a slow roll right in front of the judges. Which is all definitely a mouthful, and when you're upside down pulling 6 Gs, it can be rather difficult to remember the entire sequence altogether. The first part of learning to fly this sequence is simply start off with learning to fly each individual figure to a competition-ready level in the Yak-55M, and then start to string them together into mini-sequences, and then string those mini-sequences into eventually the full sequence of maneuvers for the judges. Thankfully, I got the help that I really needed with the assistance of a professional aerobatic coach to help me walk through and learn to fly each figure and then the sequence as a whole. Now, you may be wondering, Spud, how can a coach train you when the Yak-55 is a single-seat aircraft? And the answer to that is quite simple. He coaches me from the ground over the radio from the same perspective of the judges. This is actually the very best way to get the most out of an aerobatic coach, because he or she will see things the way the judges will. And what may look like the most perfect hammerhead or loop or spin ever from the cockpit may look absolutely terrible to somebody viewing it from the ground. And this is why competition aerobatics are so different from, say, gentlemen's aerobatics just going out to have some fun, or tactical military maneuvers. In this phase, rather than going all the way out to the aerobatic box at Borrego Valley Airport, we just kind of created our own box near Ramona and El Capitan Reservoir using some various landmarks. because at this point we are really just working on the basics of the figures themselves. My coach really helped me start to pull things together, and really helped relieve some of my anxiety about the upcoming contest because I was finally getting the hang of how to fly the Yak-55 while looking as good as possible. I had really a ton of old habits to break from flying slower and more inefficient and draggy biplanes like the Great Lakes or the Pitt Special that were causing me to way over control the Yak-55, and leading me to not only make the figures look terrible, but to also bleed tons of energy unnecessarily and chew up altitude that I really didn't have in the sequence. And once I started to string the entire sequence together, from figure 1 through figure 11, I started to face really my biggest challenge yet: altitude control. Trying to start the sequence low enough to get a good presentation score from the judges so they could see my airplane really well, but high enough to build up enough energy to complete the sequence and ensure that I don't break the floor of the box and end up at a dangerously low altitude. But that's exactly why aerobatics and airshow pilots, from the Blue Angels to world champions to little old me, practice figures and routines at higher altitudes and then bring them lower and lower as they become more and more comfortable with their sequences. Altitude control will probably be my biggest challenge throughout the rest of my competition prep and be a source of anxiety throughout the competition as well. This isn't really helped by the fact that there is definitely a noticeable delay in the airspeed and altitude readout of the pitot-static system of the Yak-55M. But with things more or less worked out at this point, it was time to head to the desert and fly in the box itself. In my experience, the third phase of preparing for the competition is always the most fun, and sometimes even more fun than the contest itself. In this phase, we know the routine and we know how to fly the figures of the sequence, so it's time to bring it out to the actual aerobatic box, and in our case the box at Borrego Valley Airport. At this point, my coach is focusing more on how the entire sequence looks, or parts of the sequence, rather than the individual figures themselves, although we do go back and revisit a figure once in a while. And making the way you fly that sequence in your particular aircraft type look as nice as possible for the judges. Because of its symmetrical airfoil, the Yak-55 has to be at a pretty high angle of attack in order to fly straight and level. While this allows the Yak to fly very well inverted, flying straight and level actually looks like a slight climb to the judges on the ground. So you have to lower your nose slightly and actually descend a bit to make a line look good for the judges. Which, of course, kind of just added to my worry about finishing the sequence too low in the box. But working with an aerobatic coach allows you to fine-tune even the smallest of issues that are nearly imperceptible from the cockpit, but makes a big difference for how things look on the ground. Other examples of this include setting up lines and down lines that may look slightly positive or negative from the cockpit, but look perfect from the ground. Or setting 45-degree lines that may be perfect from the cockpit, but one judge is going to call shallow and another judge is going to call steep anyway. And beyond the altitude worries, there's of course the actual placement of your routine in front of the judges to get the highest presentation score possible. One of the largest changes to IAC competition rules lately was the elimination of corner judges, who will deduct points from your score if you mistakenly exit the box. This change now makes the box more of a guideline and allows some more flexibility, but it is still very important to stay right in front of the judges for a better presentation score now that it's weighted more heavily. But this added flexibility means that you can more easily account for things such as wind direction, and in my case, getting used to flying a new aircraft in a new sequence that flies a lot faster than what I'm used to. Getting the sequence to look nice in the box in front of the judges while juggling a new airplane and new sequence is definitely a challenge, especially because the cockpit sits right on top of the wings and makes it more difficult to see exactly where you are flying over at any given time. You'll notice that other aircraft, such as pit specials, game birds, extras, or lasers, the cockpit is usually behind the wings, or there are windows in the floor of the cockpit to check your box positioning. This means that in the Yak-55M, you really have to correlate the edges and center of the box with additional landmarks further out from the airport, such as farmers' fields, mountains, hills, etc., while also adjusting your box positioning while diving down into the box itself and giving your wing wags to the judges, as well as using precise mental timing to essentially dead reckon your way around the box during your sequence while it's hidden down below your big old fat yak wing. Thankfully, for this upcoming contest, we have home field advantage here at Borrego Valley Airport, so I can get in a bunch of practice flights, both with and without coaching, to really dial flying the sequence in the box. So I said earlier in this video that Phase 3 of competition prep is my favorite part of the whole experience, and can be even more fun than the actual competition itself. And that really just comes down to the fact that it's a very casual event. The box is no-dum open, I get to work with a coach, which is always a blast, and get to hang out with and reconnect with some awesome people who are also out there practicing while chilling out in the hot desert with some cool airplanes. Phase 3, practicing in the box, really just embodies everything I love about flying aerobatics and general aviation. And this year, with the Yakovlev Yak-55M Mischief, it really reignited that spark and that love of aviation and flying, which I think is just so important for my own personal mental and physical health as an airline pilot. In the next video, guys, we're going to take a look at flying the Yak at the IAC 36 Acrofest 2024 competition at Borrego Valley Airport. So please make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss it, and we will see you guys in the next one. Fly safe out there, guys, and if there are any topics about the Yak, or aerobatic flying, or the contest that you guys would like to see more in-depth content on, please let me know in the comments section down below.